As the mansion stood on the edge of the city like a fortress of wealth, its tall iron gates guarding secrets no one dared to question. To outsiders, it was a picture of perfection. A billionaire's palace with golden lights, endless corridors, and walls lined with priceless art. People admired it from a distance, whispering in awe about the man who owned it, Mr. Richard Hayes. To the world, he was powerful, successful, untouchable. But inside, the air carried a heaviness that money could never disguise. That evening, the silence in the house was unlike any Evelyn had ever felt. Evelyn Johnson, the black maid who had served in that mansion for 5 long years, was a woman who noticed things others missed. She wasn't just a maid, she was an observer, a silent witness to the life that unfolded behind the golden doors. She had seen laughter, anger, and sadness within those walls. But tonight was different. She had just set the dining table, polishing each piece of silverware until it gleamed. The chandelier sparkled above her, its light reflecting off the marble floors. But there was no warmth in that glow. It was cold, distant, like the atmosphere that had settled over the house. Evelyn glanced at the long oak table. Every place setting was perfect, every napkin folded like it belonged in a magazine. But the chair at the end, the one that belonged to little Emma, sat empty. Emma, the billionaire's 8-year-old daughter, was usually the first one at the table. She would run down the staircase in her white socks, her laughter bouncing off the walls. She would chatter about her day at school, her drawings, or her favorite bedtime stories. Emma had a way of brightening the house, of making the massive mansion feel like a home. But that night, the chair remained vacant. Evelyn's hands paused on the silver tray she was holding. A wave of unease washed over her. Something wasn't right. She looked toward Mr. Hayes, who was standing near the fireplace, staring into the flames like a man lost in thought. "Where is Emma?" Evelyn asked softly, her voice careful. Mr. Hayes turned, adjusting his tie with quick, sharp movements. His face, usually composed and polished, looked strangely tense. "She's not feeling well," he replied curtly. "Nothing is wrong." The answer was too quick, too rehearsed. Evelyn knew when someone was hiding something. She had raised her own children, after all. She had soothed scraped knees, wiped away tears, and listened to secrets whispered in the dark. Children did not simply vanish from dinner without a reason. Her chest tightened. She wanted to ask more, to press him, but the icy tone in his voice told her not to push. For a moment, silence hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Evelyn carried the tray to the kitchen, but her mind wasn't on her work. She couldn't shake the feeling that the house itself was holding its breath. The usual noises, the echo of running feet, the faint hum of music from Emma's room, the sound of her humming when she played with her dolls, were absent. Instead, the halls felt hollow, every shadow stretching longer than it should. As she walked through the corridors, Evelyn thought back to the past few weeks. Emma had seemed quieter lately, less cheerful. The spark in her eyes had dimmed. Evelyn had asked her about it once, but Emma had only smiled weakly and said, "I'm okay." Evelyn knew that smile. It was the smile of a child who wanted to hide pain. Now, with Mr. Hayes's cold assurance that nothing was wrong, Evelyn's instincts screamed louder than ever. Something was happening, something Emma was too scared to say. The rest of the evening passed in strange silence. Dinner was eaten quickly, without conversation. Mr. Hayes hardly touched his food, and his gaze kept shifting to the staircase as though he didn't want Evelyn to go near it. The tension pressed down on her chest, like a weight she couldn't lift. When the dishes were done and the lights dimmed, Evelyn retreated to her small room at the back of the mansion. But she couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, staring at the moonlit garden, her mind racing. What was Mr. Hayes hiding? Why was Emma's absence brushed off so quickly? Why did the house feel like a cage tonight instead of a home? Evelyn remembered something her grandmother once told her. A house can wear a mask just like a person, but if you listen closely, the walls will whisper the truth. And tonight, the walls were screaming. Around midnight, Evelyn left her room and tiptoed through the dark hallways. Her footsteps were soft, her ears straining for any sound. She passed by the portraits of Mr. Hayes's ancestors, their painted eyes following her like silent judges. The marble floors felt icy beneath her feet, but it wasn't the cold that made her shiver. It was fear. At the end of the corridor, she paused. A faint sound reached her ears. Not laughter, not music. A sound that made her blood run cold. A muffled sob. It was coming from upstairs, from Emma's room. Evelyn's heart pounded as she climbed the staircase. Each step felt heavier, like the house itself was trying to stop her. When she reached the door, she hesitated, her hand hovering over the knob. Should she go in? What if Mr. Hayes was right? What if she was overthinking? But then the sob came again, softer this time, but full of pain. And Evelyn knew. She couldn't stay silent. Not now. Not when a child needed her. She pushed the door open slowly, and the sight that met her eyes froze her where she stood. Emma was curled up in her bed, her tiny shoulders shaking, her face buried in her pillow. She looked so small, so fragile, as if the weight of the entire world rested on her little frame. Evelyn rushed inside, her heart breaking at the sight. "Baby girl, what's wrong?" she whispered, kneeling beside the bed. "Did something happen?" Emma flinched at her touch, then turned and threw her arms around Evelyn's neck, clinging to her as though she was her only lifeline. "Please don't tell Daddy," Emma begged, her voice trembling. "Tell Daddy what?" Evelyn asked gently, though her chest tightened with dread. Emma's lips quivered. Her small voice cracked as she whispered, "The monster comes at night." Evelyn's heart pounded as the little girl's words lingered in the air like a ghost. "The monster comes at night." For a long moment the maid couldn't breathe. She tried to keep her voice steady, though fear swirled inside her like a storm. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" she whispered, brushing Emma's tangled hair away from her tear-streaked face. Emma's eyes, wide and frightened, darted toward the door as if she expected someone to burst in. Her lips trembled. "I can't say. Daddy says I'm not allowed." Evelyn tightened her arms around the child, her protective instincts rising like fire. She had raised her own children. She knew the difference between a child's wild imagination and real pain. This wasn't make-believe. This wasn't a nightmare Emma had dreamed up. This was something living, breathing, terrifying. The little girl clutched Evelyn's sleeve, holding on as though she would fall apart without her. "If I tell," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible, "he'll be angry. He always says nothing is wrong. But it hurts, Evelyn. It hurts so much." Those words pierced Evelyn's heart. She had seen bruises on Emma's arms once, faint and hidden under long sleeves, but Mr. Hayes had brushed it off, saying she'd fallen at school. Evelyn hadn't pressed further then, but now the puzzle pieces were fitting together, too perfectly, too painfully. She tried to steady her voice. "Emma, listen to me. You are safe with me. Nothing bad will happen to you while I'm here. Can you trust me?" Emma hesitated, then nodded slightly, her tiny body still trembling. She buried her face in Evelyn's shoulder, and the sound of her soft sobs broke the silence of the night. For a few minutes, Evelyn simply held her, rocking her gently like a mother would rock a child back to sleep. She whispered soothing words, humming softly, though her mind was racing with questions. Who was the monster Emma spoke of? What exactly was happening in this house? And why did Mr. Hayes insist everything was fine? Finally, Emma pulled back a little, her voice shaking. The monster. He comes when it's dark. He tells me not to cry, not to scream. He says I have to be quiet." She paused, covering her face with her small hands. "But I don't want him to come anymore." Evelyn's throat tightened. She wanted to ask more, but she could see how much it cost Emma to say even that much. Pushing her would only make her retreat into silence. So Evelyn decided to take another approach. "Emma," she said softly, cupping the girl's face in her hands, "sometimes monsters are not like the ones in storybooks. Sometimes they are people who do bad things and then try to hide them. But do you know something?" Emma sniffled, shaking her head. "No matter how scary they seem, monsters can be stopped. They can't win forever. Do you believe that?" For the first time that night, a flicker of hope passed through Emma's eyes. She gave a tiny nod. Evelyn kissed her forehead. "Good. Because I promise you, baby, I won't let the monster hurt you anymore. Not as long as I'm here." Emma clung to her, whispering, "Don't leave me." "I won't," Evelyn said firmly. "Never." That night, Evelyn stayed by Emma's side until the child finally fell asleep, her little hand still clutching the maid's fingers. Evelyn sat in the chair by the bed, her eyes fixed on the door, her ears straining for any sound. The mansion was too quiet. So quiet it felt like the silence itself was hiding secrets. When the first light of dawn crept through the curtains, Evelyn slipped away to the kitchen, her mind heavy with what she had heard. Every clatter of dishes, every sip of coffee she prepared for Mr. Hayes, felt mechanical. Her mind replayed Emma's words again and again. "The monster comes at night." She couldn't ignore it. She wouldn't. Later that morning, she checked on Emma again. The girl was sitting on the edge of her bed, staring at the floor. Her usually bright eyes looked dull, clouded with exhaustion. Evelyn sat beside her, handing her a warm cup of milk. "Did you sleep at all?" Evelyn asked gently. Emma shrugged. "I kept waiting. I was scared he would come again." Evelyn's jaw clenched, her heart aching for the child. "Sweetheart, you don't deserve to live in fear. Children should laugh, play and dream, not cry themselves to sleep." Emma looked at her with wide eyes, as though she wanted to believe that, but didn't know how. "Do you really think the monster can go away?" she asked in a whisper. Evelyn held her chin gently. "I don't just think it, I know it. But I need you to be brave. Can you be brave with me?" Emma hesitated, then nodded. "If you're with me." "I'll always be with you," Evelyn promised again. The rest of the day only deepened Evelyn's unease. Mr. Hayes behaved like nothing was wrong. He worked in his study, attended phone calls and walked around with his usual air of power and authority. But Evelyn noticed how his eyes sometimes flicked toward Emma when he thought no one was looking. There was something sharp, something unsettling in that gaze, like a man guarding a secret at all costs. Evelyn's instincts screamed louder than ever. Emma's fear was real. The child wasn't imagining anything, and Mr. Hayes's quick dismissal of her pain only confirmed it. By evening, Evelyn had made a silent vow to herself. She didn't care about losing her job. She didn't care about what the billionaire might say or do. Her only concern was Emma. That little girl needed someone to fight for her, someone to listen, someone to act. And if no one else would, Evelyn would. She tucked Emma into bed again that night, staying until her breathing softened into sleep. Then she stood by the window, staring out at the dark garden beyond. Her heart raced, her mind replaying every word Emma had said. The mansion might have looked beautiful from the outside, but inside, it was a cage. A cage where a little girl's innocence was being stolen, night after night. But Evelyn wasn't going to let that continue. Not anymore. She whispered to the sleeping child, "Don't be afraid, baby girl. Your monster's days are numbered." And for the first time, Evelyn felt the fire of determination burning inside her. She knew what she had to do. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of the mansion, but instead of warmth, it cast long shadows across the marble floors. Evelyn moved about the house, polishing, dusting, and tidying as usual, but her thoughts were anything but calm. Emma's words from the night before haunted her. The monster comes at night. Every time Evelyn passed the grand staircase or the long hallways lined with portraits, she felt those words echoing in her head. She knew she could no longer pretend that nothing was wrong. The child's trembling voice and tears were proof enough. Something was happening inside this house, and Mr. Hayes's quick denial only made her more certain. By mid-morning, Evelyn made up her mind. She couldn't carry this burden in silence. She needed answers, and she needed to confront the only person who held the power to explain. Richard Hayes himself. She found him in his study, the room that always smelled of leather and cigar smoke. Bookshelves lined the walls, and behind the massive mahogany desk sat the billionaire, impeccably dressed as always, reading through a stack of documents. His presence filled the room, commanding and cold. Evelyn paused at the door, her heart pounding. She reminded herself of why she was there. Not for herself, but for Emma. Taking a deep breath, she stepped inside. "Sir," she began softly but firmly, "I need to speak with you about Emma." Mr. Hayes looked up, his eyes sharp as steel. "What about her?" he asked, his voice clipped. "She's not herself," Evelyn said carefully, choosing her words with respect but urgency. "She cries at night. She's withdrawn. She told me—" Before she could finish, he cut her off, his tone rising. "She's fine. Children cry. Children imagine things. You should know that by now." Evelyn's hands trembled slightly, but she clasped them together to steady herself. "With all due respect, sir, this is not imagination. Emma told me she's hurting. She spoke of a monster." "Enough!" The word boomed through the study like a gunshot. Mr. Hayes slammed his fist on the desk, causing the papers to scatter. His face twisted in fury, veins standing out on his neck. "I told you!" he barked, his eyes blazing. "Nothing is wrong in this house!" Evelyn flinched but did not back down. Her voice wavered but carried determination. "Sir, I cannot ignore what I've seen and heard. Emma is in pain. Something is happening to her. You cannot expect me to turn away." Mr. Hayes rose from his chair, towering over her. His shadow fell across her face. "Do you know who I am, Evelyn? Do you understand what you're risking? This is my house, my daughter. You are here to clean and cook, not to question me." His words were like daggers, dripping with authority and threat. He stepped closer, his gaze sharp enough to cut through her resolve. But Evelyn held her ground, even though her knees shook beneath her. "I may be your maid," she said quietly, her voice steadying with every word. "But I am also a mother, and I know the look of a child who is suffering. Sir, Emma is not safe. I can see it in her eyes." For a split second, something flickered in Mr. Hayes's face. Something dark, something that looked like fear. But just as quickly, he masked it with rage. "If you value your position here," he hissed, his voice low and dangerous, "you will never speak of this again. Do your job, Evelyn. Stay out of matters that don't concern you." Her heart pounded. His threat was clear. He wanted her silence. But she also knew what silence would cost. Emma's safety, Emma's innocence, maybe even Emma's life. Evelyn took a slow breath, her voice soft but filled with conviction. "A child's safety will always concern me, sir. You can fire me if you wish, you can try to silence me, but I will not ignore her pain." But for a moment, The room went silent except for the crackling fireplace. Mr. Hayes's jaw clenched, his fists tightening at his sides. His eyes burned with a fury that made Evelyn's skin crawl. "Get out," he finally said, his voice cold and final. "Leave my sight before I lose my patience." Evelyn stood tall, meeting his gaze one last time. She didn't argue further. She knew she couldn't win against his power here and now. But deep in her heart, she made another vow. She would not be silenced. When Evelyn walked out of the study, her hands were trembling, her throat dry. The weight of his anger lingered over her like a storm cloud. She knew she was walking a dangerous line. Mr. Hayes wasn't just any man. He was a billionaire, a man used to control, a man used to making problems disappear. Crossing him could cost her job, her home, even her safety. But then she thought of Emma's tearful eyes, the way she clung to her sleeve, begging, "Don't leave me." That memory gave Evelyn strength. She whispered to herself as she walked down the long corridor, "I won't leave you, baby girl, no matter what." The rest of the day passed in uneasy quiet. Evelyn went about her chores, her mind replaying the confrontation in the study. She noticed how Mr. Hayes carried himself differently, more watchful, more guarded. His eyes lingered on her with suspicion, as though he knew she was a threat to his carefully built facade. At lunch, Emma sat at the table with her small hands folded in her lap, her eyes downcast. Mr. Hayes tried to act normal, discussing business calls and investments as if nothing had happened. But Evelyn saw the way Emma shrank in her chair, silent, afraid to speak. It broke Evelyn's heart. Later, when Mr. Hayes left for a meeting, Evelyn knelt beside Emma and whispered, "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" Emma only shook her head, her lips pressed tight. The fear in her eyes told Evelyn everything. The child was terrified to speak, terrified of her own father. Evelyn swallowed hard, her anger boiling beneath her calm exterior. She knew now, beyond all doubt, that something horrible was happening. And no matter what threats Mr. Hayes hurled at her, she could not and would not stay silent. She had confronted him and seen the truth in his eyes. His denial was not ignorance, it was protection of his own secrets, secrets that were eating his daughter alive. And if Mr. Hayes thought his wealth and power could keep the truth buried, he was wrong. Because Evelyn had made up her mind, she was going to uncover the monster inside this house, no matter the cost. The mansion felt different that night. The air itself seemed heavier, as though the walls were keeping a secret too dark to carry. Evelyn could feel it pressing against her chest with every breath she took. She had spent the day replaying her confrontation with Mr. Hayes, every word echoing in her mind. His rage, his threats, his demand for silence. It had only confirmed what she already knew. Something was terribly wrong in this house, and tonight she was determined to see it with her own eyes. As the clock in the hallway struck midnight, Evelyn sat quietly in a shadowed corner, pretending to dust the banister. Her heart beat fast, her palms clammy with fear. But she didn't move. She was waiting, listening, watching. And then she heard it. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps moving down the hallway. She held her breath, straining to hear more. They were coming closer, echoing softly against the polished floors. Slowly, she leaned into the shadows, peeking around the corner. There he was, Mr. Hayes. Dressed in his tailored nightrobe, his expression unreadable, he moved silently toward Emma's room. Evelyn's stomach churned. Every part of her wanted to scream, to run to Emma's door and shield the child. But she forced herself to wait, to watch, to gather the proof she needed. Mr. Hayes reached the door and pushed it open quietly. The faint creak of the hinges made Evelyn's heart lurch. He slipped inside, closing the door behind him. The hallway fell silent. For a moment, Evelyn froze, her body trembling with rage and fear. Her mind screamed at her to act, and then she heard it, the muffled sobs of a little girl. That was all it took. Evelyn could no longer stand by. She stormed forward, her footsteps quick, her breath sharp. Without hesitation, she flung the door open. "Sir!" she shouted. The scene before her stopped her cold. Emma was on the bed, clutching her blanket tightly, her face wet with tears. Her small body trembled with fear. And there, standing too close, was Mr. Hayes. His face twisted in shock as he spun around to see Evelyn in the doorway. For a moment, silence stretched across the room. The mask he had worn for years, the polished, powerful billionaire, slipped away. His eyes, once full of authority, now burned with raw fury. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. Evelyn rushed to Emma's side, pulling the child into her arms. The girl clung to her desperately, burying her face in Evelyn's shoulder. "Stay away from her!" Evelyn cried, her voice shaking but strong. "Don't you dare come near this child!" "You don't understand," Mr. Hayes shouted, his face reddening with rage. "This is my daughter, my house. You have no right to interfere." Evelyn held Emma tighter, her hands trembling but her spirit unyielding. "No, sir. You're wrong. Every child has a right to be safe. And I have every right to protect her when she's not." Mr. Hayes's eyes narrowed, his chest rising and falling heavily. "You'll regret this, Evelyn. You'll regret ever crossing me." But Evelyn was done being afraid. She had seen enough. She had heard enough. And she knew she could not leave Emma in this man's hands for one more night. With her free hand, she grabbed the phone from the bedside table. Her fingers shook as she dialed, but her voice was clear when the operator answered. 1-1, what's your emergency?" "This is Evelyn Johnson," she said firmly, though her heart raced. "I'm at the Hayes mansion on Westwood Avenue. The little girl here is in danger. Please send the police immediately." Mr. Hayes's face turned pale with fury. "You dare call the police on me? Do you know who I am? Do you know how much power I hold?" Evelyn met his gaze, her voice steady. "I don't care who you are. I care about her." She looked down at Emma, who clung to her with wide, terrified eyes. "And I will not let you hurt her any more." Mr. Hayes lunged forward as if to snatch the phone from her, but Evelyn stood her ground, her body shielding Emma. "Don't you take another step," she warned, surprising even herself with the strength in her voice. For the first time, the billionaire hesitated. His anger was still there, but beneath it was something else. Panic. The sound of sirens in the distance broke the tense silence. Mr. Hayes's mask cracked further. He backed away, muttering under his breath, pacing like a trapped animal. Evelyn held Emma close, whispering soothing words, stroking her hair. "It's okay, baby. You're safe now. The police are coming. The monster can't hurt you anymore." Emma's small voice trembled. "Are you sure?" Evelyn pressed her cheek against the girl's head, tears in her own eyes. "I promise." Minutes later, red and blue lights flashed outside the mansion. The sound of car doors slamming echoed up the driveway. Heavy boots pounded against the marble floor as officers entered the house. Mr. Hayes tried to compose himself, straightening his robe, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. "Officers," he said smoothly, though his voice shook slightly. "There's been a mistake. My maid is confused. Everything is fine here.